Hello and welcome to Unconditional. My name is Kayleigh.
My name's Patrick.
And we are a husband and wife duo, if you will. And we've been talking about in previous parts, part 1 and part 2 of our videos, about our experience of leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses. In the previous video, Patrick gave us a little run through of how he began to realize that things weren't right and his waking up process. And in this video, we're going to look a little bit more in depth at my waking up process, a little bit more complicated. But yes, I guess we'll get just stuck right in.
Yeah.
So we spoke previously about when our first child was born, that was a little chink in the armor, that we knew if she needed anything, that we she would have any medical treatment necessary. It wasn't even a question of that. And she's a funny little character. She's a very intuitive little girl. And me being the good JW mother started the indoctrination from very early, from probably in the womb, reading my book of Bible stories to her. And she was an early talker. And this is another chink. This was a big chink for me personally, which is why I'm going to start off mentioning this one. She was about 15 or 16 months old, and we were reading the account of Noah's flood and looking at the pictures in my book of Bible stories. Now, I have to say off the bat that there were certain stories I didn't want to read her in my book of Bible stories, and that should have been an alarm bell, as it was. But I thought I was safe with Noah's Ark. And in that picture, the scene where the ark is floating on the water and it's raining and the animals and people drowning, there is a mother sitting with her newborn baby on the rocks. And Elin picked up on this and she said to me, "What's going to happen to the mommy and the baby?" And it stopped me. I stopped dead in my tracks. I couldn't read her anymore because it hit me. It hit me that they were going to die. That I was reading her a murder scene, basically, is what was going to happen. And she was 16 months old. And after that, I think we attempted one other story. And I put my book of Bible stories up on the top shelf in the cupboard, and we never opened it again. So for me, that was a big alarm bell.
And that almost traumatized her as well, because she's got a really good memory, and even years later, she would bring up things that she saw. Was it the one with Solomon?
It was Solomon.
Who was about to cut the baby in half.
It was Solomon.
And she always brought that up, a long time after. So it just shows you the kind of things you're putting into these kids. She still
talks about that, and she's now 4.5, going on 5 at the end of this year. So she talks about things that happened when she was 1. So she doesn't forget things easily.
My book of horror stories.
Yeah, it is my book of horror stories. But that was a big one. I would close her eyes because now in the Kingdom halls these days, they have the big screens that they project on. And they would project like Jesus dying or something like that. Any negative scenes, or I would tend to either take her out or close her eyes. I wasn't comfortable with the things that they were showing children, let alone all the Watchtower articles. They couldn't get through a meeting. It almost became a bit of a joke that they couldn't get through a meeting without mentioning sex.
Yeah, or someone being slaughtered or killed or something the kids shouldn't have been.
Yes, and when you become a parent, you become acutely aware of things that your kids should and shouldn't.
I don't know. I think a lot of witnesses just came.
Maybe it was some parents.
I don't know. Just because we had already started going through things that it started to.
And because of experiences, maybe ourselves.
Yeah,
too, we weren't.
But yeah, some people just go along with it all.
I was always taught, though, being raised as a witness, that you're not allowed to watch certain movies. You're not allowed to watch violent movies or see anything violent or of a sexual nature or anything like that, that it wasn't appropriate. So my reasoning in my head was that if it's not appropriate for my child to view or watch on TV, if I wouldn't let her sit in the house and watch something like that, why would I let her sit in the Kingdom Hall and see it, or why would I show her pictures like that
Yeah.
in Watchtower publications? And that was the reasoning that always
Yeah.
sat in my head. So that was a big chink for me after having her. Things like my second pregnancy was high risk. I had antepartum hemorrhages, and I remember thinking panicking I was going to die after one of them, thinking I would have to refuse blood.
Yeah, I can't remember if I ever told you this, but I was already wide awake at this point, or pretty much heading in that direction, and in my head I was like, if Kayleigh is unconscious and she needs blood, I'm going to fight the doctors and make sure they give it to her. I don't know how that would have worked with the no blood thing.
I had an idea
Yeah,
that you would.
Yeah.
So, but you don't discuss these things.
That's it.
You never really verbalize them. But I guess then the next big thing that happened was Patrick telling me what he had found out about the organization, or trying to tell me that the crying and trauma.
You didn't want to hear it, did you?
I didn't want to hear it. No, I really didn't want to hear it. It caused a lot of anguish, because then I felt guilt, which we're programmed to feel guilt and shame when someone leaves Jehovah or leaves the organization, because Jehovah and organization are the same thing, really, when it boils down to it. And when he did eventually stop going, I have to say, before, let me backtrack a bit, you were very good. You never put any pressure on me. He never forced anything on me. We agreed to sit down and discuss, but of course he always had good rebuttals. So that was difficult, and eventually I gave up. But I didn't want to argue anymore, and he did write me a really long letter that I almost couldn't bring myself to, and I probably still haven't read all of it. I don't think. I don't remember a lot. You tend to block out trauma to a degree. And then when he did eventually stop going, he went from being an elder, we were poster family, to we were the scandal of the circuit, basically.
Yeah, and all I did was...
he just stopped going.
I didn't tell anyone why I'd stopped going, but
No.
I stopped... I stood down for being an elder first, then I went to a few more meetings, not many.
Over a period of about 3 months.
Yeah. But I was sort of hit and miss at the meetings then. I didn't go to all of them. But then I just stopped completely, and I was sort of feigning depression. So, I didn't want to give
That was hard.
That was very hard. That was very... Because even though, I have... And I still do suffer with depression at times, and anxiety and things like that.
I think it's only natural as a result of...
Yeah, but I wasn't going through anything at that time.
No.
But I still had... It was almost... It was very demeaning having to pretend you were going through it.
It's belittling. People pity you. They start... I started another wake-up for me, another chink in the armor, should I say, was people pitying me. I don't like being pitied. I don't like being belittled. And people suddenly wanted to invite me and the kids places, but Patrick wasn't invited. And we're close. We're a close family and a close couple. We're inseparable, really.
Do everything together mostly, yeah.
And that hurt deeply. They also stopped acknowledging him in conversation. It was as if he didn't exist.
Yeah, and like I said, I didn't give anyone any reason to think that I was an apostate.
No.
I was very careful because I didn't want that to affect any chances I had on waking Kayleigh up.
And I never opened my mouth.
Yeah, so...
Never, because my feeling is my family business is no one else's business. It's not a concern of anyone else. And I did get cornered at almost every meeting, and I wouldn't agree that he had depression, but I wouldn't disagree. I was very careful with what I said. If I said anything at all, I would make excuses to excuse myself from the conversation, or made sure I had a child with me at all times that I could get away, if you will. I guess we've skipped out a really big one, an incident going back now. So anyway, I shouldn't go back. I should go forward first. So we finish this line of reasoning because I'm jumping all over the place. So yes, it was the way they treated Patrick that was another chink. I didn't like them treating him as if he was lesser, as if he didn't exist already. And then now I can go back to the previous point. A few months prior to you being fully awake, there was an incident in the Kingdom Hall with our eldest daughter.
Oh, yeah.
I was pregnant with our second. She must have been about 19 months old, 18, 19 months old at the time. And another child around 7 years old, I caught this child inappropriately touching our daughter. And no one else witnessed it. But I know exactly what I saw because I was abused as a child by an older child than that age, but I recognized immediately what was happening. She was out of my sight for 30 seconds, and I will never forgive myself for it. And she was next to the platform in the front of the Kingdom Hall, and nobody else saw except me.
The main auditorium on the platform, and like there were
next to the platform.
Next to the platform, yeah. But the kids kind of played in the corner next to the platform, and there were adults everywhere. But yet. And
no one else saw. It was just me. So there we have the 2 witness rule. No one can back up what I saw. So, and I already knew that no one could back me up. I did get into the car. I picked Elin up. I reprimanded the other child, and I told her that it was wrong. That did she understand that it was wrong? But of course, you also don't want to interfere with someone else's child. It's a very sensitive thing. And I don't blame that child because something has happened to her to have made her do something that she doesn't understand what she's doing at all. So I got in the car, burst into tears.
You were in a real state, weren't you?
Because of my own personal experience with abuse. And my case was spanned over a number of years. So the trauma exists, and you can put it in a box for so long before it just takes something small and the lid is wide open. So the lid was wide open that day. And I spoke to Patrick, who was an elder at the time, and I said to him, I've got no one to corroborate what I've seen. I know what I've seen. There's no denying it. But how do I approach it? What do I do? I felt like my hands were tied. And you didn't know. It's a really tough situation. A very complicated situation. The mother of this child I was friends with.
Yeah. And they were in the process of sort of moving out of the country. So it was like there were just a lot of things happening around this as well.
And I know we'll probably get a lot of comments and a lot of suggestions of what we should have done or how we should have handled it. But the situation was very, very complicated. And at the time, I didn't know what to do. And I was too scared to confront the parents because of an argument and because of you start having doubts, thinking maybe I didn't see what I saw or...
But we did eventually get around to doing something about it anyway, but it kind of like the results of that showed how pointless it was anyway. So just confirming what our suspicions were at the time, which Kayleigh will come to it.
Yeah. We'll get to that, I think, eventually. Because that's really the culmination of these videos. Yeah. But so that was a huge factor. That was a crack. That wasn't a chink. That was a crack because when someone interferes with your child, that's a whole nother ball game. I became quite paranoid in the congregation. because Patrick wasn't attending anymore. And at that point, we'd already come to an agreement that the kids wouldn't be going to meetings for too much longer.
Right.
I had agreed with him.
Which I was really surprised about, by the way.
That the kids wouldn't be raised
she came around
as
to that
witnesses.
quite easily.
Yeah, I think after someone messes with your child, you snap a little bit. And that was a breaking point for me. So the kids did start going a little bit less. They missed the odd meeting. I get comments and I just say, oh, they're home with daddy, or oh, she's got a cough or sniffles, or became a very good liar. But yeah, where do I go from here? I guess.
I don't know. I mean, there was, even after that, there was a lot happened.
A lot happened. I mean, there's my own experience, I guess, came up after that. That it sat with me. That now my experience of abuse was with an older child in the organization. This child didn't go on to be raised as a witness. It is, again, no fault of her own for the things that she did. It's the mark of a child that themselves has been abused. I don't harbor any bad feelings towards that person. What's done is done. You carry certain things with you for the rest of your life, but at the end of the day, for me, I like to pick up and move on. That's just how I am. I like to put things in a box.
You're very good at compartmentalizing things.
Compartmentalizing, that's the way to put it. So
it just shows how insidious it really is, though, doesn't
it?
It
is, because as a child, I'm getting there. I'm slowly getting there.
It's okay.
That as a child within the organization, I understood, because I was 5 when the abuse started, that I understood even at age 5 that I couldn't tell anyone, that I couldn't tell my mum or my dad or my grandparents, because it happened when I was in the care of my grandparent. And as a child, you understand there are consequences. You may be 5 years old, 6 years old, even 4 years old. You understand that people who do things that aren't quite right, even if you're not fully aware that they're not right, that people face discipline in the congregation, that people are torn from their families. You understand that there are people who don't talk to their family members anymore, or the people who have done wrong, that they call their names out on the platform.
Just the fact
that I thought my mother wouldn't want me anymore. I thought that I was going to have to go live with somebody else. So that's not even the verbal teaching. That's the psychology that goes in as a child, the indoctrination from that early. You understand there are consequences for stepping out of line, serious consequences. And so I felt that I was responsible for the abuse. It was my fault that it happened. You learn to self-police is the best way to put it, I think, from very, very young. You conform, you self-police, you self-discipline. And that's just the nature of it. You don't talk, you don't tell anybody, even if you should have. So that was my experience. And just before we got married, I also learned of that the generation above me had suffered child sex abuse. I won't go into any detail because it's not my story to tell. It's a very serious case of abuse. And like I said, well, it's not for me to talk about because it isn't personally about me. But the area of abuse was what really broke it wide open. Eventually, I permitted myself to watch, at least in part, the Royal Commission.
Yeah, which is something I tried to get you to watch.
And I just couldn't, and I just couldn't, and I just couldn't. And eventually, when you spend a lot of time thinking about it, I thought about how in the case, and I said I wasn't going to talk about it, and I'm not going to any detail, but the case in the generation above me, they were silenced by the organization, by the elders. The case went unreported, unresolved. And eventually these things, when you think about them, things start to fall in line and you see it for what it really is.
Yeah.
And so for me, the abuse was a huge factor, particularly when it hit home with the next generation, with our daughter.
Yeah. And that's why it's so pervasive, is because of this culture of self-silencing. I mean, like the fact that a 5-year-old could intuitively know that those things and self-police, it's really scary. And even as adults, you just, there's something that, because of the indoctrination, you think a certain way because you're told to think that way.
I remember crying growing up repeatedly, and I mean hysterical in the middle of the night when no one knew that I was hysterical, to the point of vomiting, thinking that I was going to die at Armageddon because of the things that I had been a part of, that I didn't deserve to live in paradise. I didn't deserve to see loved ones who had died. And I wasn't worthy, I wasn't good enough. It was also another factor. I didn't want to get baptized because I never spoke to the elders about it. I never came forward about it until I was 21, and I told Patrick. And Patrick was the first person I told because I felt that he deserved to know the truth before we got married. And so I told him. And then it got a bit easier to talk about with a few other people. And from then you start to realize that there are a lot of people you grew up with have had run-ins with abuse. And I can think of at least probably 8 friends that I grew up with, or that I know, having had a run-in with abuse, and some abusers who were within our circle of friends and who are still running wild in the organization, who, are at loose to just repeatedly do it again. And it's time for change. And that's why I wanted to speak out about it. That's why we wanted to make these videos, because I guess everybody wants to have their say and have their story told.
Yeah, it's like you said before, it's not a nice subject to have to deal with.
No.
But I remember someone sort of challenged you before when you were speaking out about it on another platform. I think it was a blog you wrote or something, and they were saying something along the lines of, well, it's not really something you should be talking about. And you said, well, that's the problem. When you don't talk about it and you keep it a secret, that's why it becomes an issue, because no one's shining a light on it. But when you start talking about it and shining lights on these things, then they become exposed.
Silence is what they want. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's fine.
Silence is what they want. So the only way to stop that is to break their cycle.
Yeah.
Break the silence. The stories need to be told, and so many people are telling their stories.
Yeah.
And ours is just one more to add. One more to add to the collective voice, I guess. So I think that's probably enough for part 3. I'm trying to think what else. Yes. Now a lot happened in the lead up to us actually disassociating, which is what we did. And so that, I think, deserves a new video of its own. So we're probably going to finish off here. Thank you very much for watching part 3. And we look forward to sharing part 4 with you. If you enjoy our videos, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in part 4. Thank you for watching.
Don't forget the bell.
Just ignore him.